Welcome to Wisdom Journey. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. Today's guest is Matthew Edgar, partner at Elementive and author of Tech SEO Guide and Speed Metrics Guide. With over 20 years solving complex technical SEO challenges and optimizing for AI-driven search and site performance, Matthew has helped everyone from startups to 4,500s boost visibility and speed. We'll unpack how to diagnose crawl errors. Guru's search generative experience has been rolled out, right? What would you say is the biggest misconceptions a lot of bloggers, creators have about AI and rankings?
I think there's a few big misconceptions that I'm seeing people have. I think one of the big questions around it, one of the big things to figure out is whether or not AI search is going to be directly competitive with your blog or not. And I think a lot of people are kind of saying, well, it's directly competitive. There's no way I can compete against AI answers showing up. If generative AI just takes my blog and they use that to respond, what can I do? And they kind of look at it as, there's kind of nothing to be gained from that. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I've seen some people experimenting with this around, okay, they're going to take some parts of the blog. They might take, informational parts of the blog or something and include that, but maybe there's other value that you can add, or there's other, ways that you can, incorporate something, because after somebody gets that answer, okay, fine, generative AI might give some of that, but they might want more information, or they might want to take some kind of action. So what are those action points that you can have? What are those additional pieces of information that you can include? What are the kind of follow-up questions that you can include? So I think that's one, big misconception I'm seeing, is that it's definitely going to take away traffic. It's going to take away some traffic, no doubt. But I think there's ways that we can get creative and maybe keep some of the traffic, on our sites, by rethinking about, okay, how can we kind of reshape our content? How can we, do things in a slightly different way to maybe continue to get some traffic coming in, or to get some types of traffic still coming into our blog. The other misconception I would throw out there that I've seen people thinking about with AI search gets more into the kind of technical nature of how AI search works. So with AI search, there's kind of two different systems that we have to optimize for. Right? Everybody's talking about the large language model, which is this big pattern-based collection that's creating a statistical model of how to write responses, how to generate a response. And it's absolutely important, to potentially get into that large language model. That way you're influencing how that model is trained, what those statistical patterns are. But the one thing that I don't think enough people are talking about or thinking about is you also want to make sure to get into the AI system's knowledge base. So the knowledge base is this database that comes alongside the large language model and gives it additional things that it can incorporate in to generate a response. But importantly, within that, they also will give the large language model things to incorporate in the response for citations. And so if you think about, okay, well, how do I get my website as a citation? That's almost more important in some cases than getting your website maybe mentioned by the large language model, because you want to get that citation. That's part of how you might be able to get people back. And I know when I've looked at this for clients, even just thinking about my own search activity, like when you're on Perplexity or on AI overviews, if you see the response come back, you see the sources, like, okay, I want more information about this, particularly, for certain types of queries. So you want to make sure to show up into that. So that'd be the other one that I would point out, is that, you want to think about optimizing for the LLM. How do you establish the patterns, get in the training, but also how do you get in that knowledge base and make sure that you can show up in the citation, because that's how you're going to be able to capture maybe some of that traffic and bring it back in.
Yeah. Before I ask you the next question, I want to kind of like ask you a follow-up question on the answer you gave. I've noticed that while using LLM, that some brands, when I ask some questions, certain brands, certain names show up in suggestions. For example, I'm like, if I ask like a ChatGPT, and I'm like list and file software I could use to record my podcast. It gives me like a list of 5 podcast recording software, and in the industry there's like up to 100 different softwares. So the question I want to ask is, is there a way I can like influence how, if or how I show up in that result? People are searching and asking the LLM for, What tool do you recommend for this? What do you recommend for this? How do I follow up in such queries? Yeah, can I influence it, or is beyond
Yeah,
my control?
there are ways you can influence it. Now, the ways that you influence it, there's obviously a lot of differences with search as we kind of know it today, and some of that is because this is all new, right? This is stuff that we're not even a couple of years into having ChatGPT or AI overviews. SEO practices, we understand how to optimize for those. We understand how to go after those. It's been 2.5 decades of working with Google. And yes, things have changed and, there's a lot of differences with Google now than in the past, but, we fundamentally understand how to optimize for Google. Some of it is, yes, we can optimize, but we don't know exactly how. And so there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be done around that to figure out, okay, what are ways I can influence this? Some of the things that I've started to see with experimentation, seen other people talk about, is that it's not just about your website now. You have to think about the training data that the system is finding everywhere else. So it's about not just your website, but how your website fits into the rest of the web. So you mentioned you're looking for podcast recording software. Okay, great. Why did those 5 show up versus the hundreds of others that are out there that could have potentially shown up? And if you start to kind of go through and look at those other services that show up, why these 5 do, they're going to be ones that are the ones that are probably mentioned in the things that are in the training materials that the LLM was actually trained on. They're probably going to be the things that are in the knowledge base, right? That came back, and there's a few reasons for that. So one is it could just be straight up quantity of mentions. So maybe certain podcast recording software is mentioned more than some other one. Some of it though is also the intentions behind how they're mentioned. So when the large language model is looking at things and they're trying to build a statistical pattern, what they're looking for isn't just, oh, this is mentioned more than this other thing, but the way in which it's mentioned. So the context or the intention behind the mention. So if they know that, okay, the intention behind this one is, it's an easy software to use, or it's, really simple to use, or it's got really robust features or something, there's all this meaning and context behind it. Even if it's not mentioned as much, that might make it more valuable when the model is actually trying to respond to the prompt that you've entered about, give me the 5 best ones. And so as a result, the model is going to kind of pick up on those things and understand that a little bit more. And because it understands that a little bit more, or maybe because it, kind of picks that up in the training data a little bit more, it's going to be more likely to incorporate that into the response that comes back. So as you think about optimizing for this, yeah, it's about optimizing your website. How do you show up there? But it's also about, okay, how do you kind of work toward and optimize toward not just showing up on your own website, but how do you show up on these other places? So can you show up on social profiles, in directories, forums, right? Somewhere else that you can actually optimize toward to really kind of influence not only the quantity of how it's trained, but kind of the meaning behind how it's trained.
The
Okay.
interview. Yeah, you talked about two major things you mentioned that could possibly influence showing up on the LLMs. Is one of them is the number of times they're mentioned. So if the marketing is done such as a way that the tool is kind of pretty popular, like a lot of brands, a lot of different blogs are talking about the tool, and then the intention on how do people recommend this tool? Are they saying that, oh, it's the best tool? Oh, this tool is good if you're broke, if you don't have money to spend, or this is a premium tool, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm finding, some things really interesting to experiment with is how do you influence that intention behind it? Because this is something new with generative AI search, and this is where, like I said, there's a lot of opportunity and potentially opportunity to get traffic out of this. Is that, if you go after, let's say you run a podcast service and you want to make sure that it shows up instead of everybody else, and you're a startup, so you can't really compete with, maybe the big players. Well, okay, but if you start building a little bit of a community on, Facebook or Reddit or wherever, and you're able to talk about, yeah, we're the best one if you don't have much of a budget, or, you have, some other particular, real, necessary requirement or something, try and influence it that way. Because what's interesting about prompts is that, as opposed to search queries, is that when people type in a prompt, they're providing a little bit more nuance, a little bit more detail about it, right? It's more conversational. So they're more likely to bring in these intentions that they're looking for. And so if you can write to that, you can actually, speak to that a little bit or influence that a little bit, either on your website or on social media sites or forums, elsewhere, ideally on all those platforms, the more chances you have of potentially showing up there. Obviously not a guarantee. That's why I said, it's all new. We have to experiment with that. But those are some of the experiments that I'm working on with clients and seeing other people work on, and
You've
they're
analyzed
proving to
hundreds of
be,
sites.
useful to start influencing.
AI generated pages really ranking well, or is Google penalizing them?
Yeah. So I would say that AI generated content can rank pretty well in search results. I don't necessarily see Google penalizing it necessarily because of it's AI generated. I'm seeing it where maybe Google is penalizing it if you're not doing more than simply copying and pasting, something. So if you go to, ChatGPT, Claude, whoever, generate a blog post about X, Y, and Z, and all you do is just copy paste whatever it gives you, and then you paste it in. Yeah, Google's probably gonna knock you down for that. Um, but if you do some work and you kind of modify that a little bit, and not necessarily modify the content, though that's part of it, but it's also modifying kind of the format of it, the structure of it, how it fits into your site. So that could be things like adding in additional images, adding in internal links to really embed it into your site structure in a more intentional way. That could be from a content standpoint, making sure you adapt it to your brand voice, make sure it sounds like you, make sure you're incorporating things. Could also be, how do you actually incorporate it onto the page alongside additional content? So maybe you're adding some content to an existing blog that's AI generated. Like for example, on my blog, what I've experimented with is I've written a blog post, and I tend to write really wordy blog posts. And so I'll, ask ChatGPT, hey, can you, help me write a summary or write FAQs or something? I'll incorporate that in. So I'm kind of embedding it into the existing structure. So if you're doing things like that, where you're not just copying and pasting it directly, but you're trying to find ways to fit it into your site, try to find ways to modify the content, try to find ways to adjust it technically, like I said, with like internal links or images or, changing heading structures or something along those lines. That all can help differentiate it. And it starts to make it look more purposeful, more unique, more helpful. And those are the kinds of things that Google's evaluating. If you do that, that page has a decent chance of potentially ranking in
I
search
think
results.
content has kind of become commoditized, so everybody can basically generate content. So the question I want to ask now is, what are some systems creators can put in place, right? Kind of like maybe a checklist or list of SOPs they can put in place such that they create content that is not just um, generic content that every other person that can basically just go to ChatGPT and say, oh, what is, and it will generate it for them, right? So that they can have something that it's not just another noise out there. It's something that is unique, something that is straight to the point, something that has human touch to it, something that has value. Like, what are some things that they can create content that is beyond what AI can generate?
Yeah, and I think you touched on some of the things that are beyond what AI can generate. The things that are beyond AI, at least at present, are the things that are more, human. The things that do seem like they were actually created by a human. So, like what we're doing right now, we're having a conversation about stuff. Um, as far as I know, I'm not AI generated. I'm pretty sure you're not either. So I think we're good on that front. That helps. Kind of establish that. And that's where you see, YouTube, TikTok really taking off. A lot of people have started to shift to that. So you start to think about, okay, how can I shift to a different medium and incorporate this? I've benefited from this personally. I've noticed that my blog posts, don't get as much traffic as they used to, but I've tried to do more on YouTube to show up a little bit more. There's those kinds of things that you could do, changing the medium that you're going after. On a blog specifically, though, there's ways you can do this in your text as well. Make sure that it really sounds like your voice. Make sure you've really understood, here's how I talk and here's how it's going to come through in my blog. If my blog just kind of sounds like ChatGPT or sounds like it's AI generated, people might think that it's AI generated. Google might think it's AI generated. So how do you, alter that? I think there's also things you can do to prevent it from showing up, or look into much like it's AI generated or potentially AI generated, by changing the way the page is structured a little bit, right? So what else can you bring into this page? How can you enhance this page? Is it just a wall of text, or can you incorporate really great infographics or really great diagrams to explain something, or really photos that are really clearly something you took. Like some product review sites that I've seen and worked with, they're taking photos where it's clearly, somebody on their cell phone taking a picture. You can see their hand, you can see, stuff in the background that's clearly just like their office or their house or something. They look a little more lo-fi, right? And it's stuff that might not look quite as polished, but it looks truly like it's human created. I mean, it still looks professional, still looks good, but those kinds of things, those kinds of touches can kind of help, make sure that it starts to look, a little less, like you asked AI to do the work for you. And so I think the more, you can kind of demonstrate I'm actually a person, through the content or through changing mediums, that's where you start to see, I think some of the value,
Thanks for
start to
sharing
come
that.
through, and sort of the
If a
opportunity
creator,
still
if
exists.
someone relies on SEO for traffic, right, and in a short while we'll be looking at SEO for other platforms. What's the number one habit they need to like put in place? They need to like change today to like to survive. As someone who is doing SEO for traffic.
Uh-huh. You want to think about the different intentions behind search. Um, so when you look at, where AI overviews are showing up, a lot of the AI overviews are showing up in informational search. So that's people who are just seeking out information. AI is responding, to that. So depending on which study you look at, that's around a quarter of all informational searches right now. And of course, it's affecting, the big volume searches, the ones with lots of traffic, potential. Those are the ones getting hit the most. Haven't seen any reliable percentages around, how much AI is showing up in other features, like people also ask. Um, so those kinds of things, though, tend to skew toward informational searches as well. So informational search might be, overrun, with AI overviews. Okay, so that's, what is questions or how to questions. But what other spaces are there? What other intentions are there? Transactional, searches. Yeah, that's e-commerce, but that's also, people who are looking for comparison or reviews. I'm thinking about buying, this product, which one is best, and actually want to find somebody who's really tested this and knows this, particularly for high volume products. Okay, that's an intention that could still potentially get blog traffic. And that also speaks to some of the other opportunities, right? Is you can go after, things where people are likely to actually want more than an AI answer. And I'm starting to see some differentiation with that, where people are fine with an AI response for low stakes things, right? I'm going to buy, a new book to read. The book isn't going to cost me very much. If AI recommends something that I end up not liking, well, I'm out, however much. Okay, that's not very much. But, on the other hand, I'm thinking about buying a new appliance or a new car or a new, something big, like a bigger ticket item, bigger, travel, endeavor that I'm going to spend money on. Then, people might be more likely to actually want to read a little bit more, research a little bit more about this. And so maybe there's still some traffic potential there. So all that to say, really start to think through what's the intention here behind those searches, and how, are people going to change their search habits related to those intentions? How's Google changing things related to those intentions? And within that, I think there's still some opportunities to be had, where you can go after things, but you absolutely do need to shift, uh, your strategies probably with content to go after some of those different
Uh,
intents
Now
than maybe what you've
SEO
been able to
is
do in the
is
past.
is I think the two majors, one of the two popular sites is Google and YouTube, and these are platforms that SEO kind of applies to. So for me, the question I want to ask now is there like a kind of like top level overview of a system to like use SEO to get traffic? Let's say, for example, YouTube. I want us to like leave Google for a bit. Let's say YouTube. If I wanted to do SEO to get traffic to, let's say, my offer, my products, my website, on YouTube, what would be the workflow or the system I would use, to do that on YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube is, got some similarities with SEO overall, but it definitely has its own specific practices around it. YouTube is definitely very influenced by the title, the description that you enter in. It's definitely influenced by your audience size, definitely influenced by community factors, more so. So focusing on those things, trying to optimize toward those things, can really help. You show up better on YouTube. I've tended to find too that, with YouTube, we're talking about two different things, right? We're showing up one on YouTube itself, but then potentially showing up on YouTube when it surfaces in Google search results. And so we need to think about both those angles. So the community side of things, the title, the description, that kind of stuff, user engagement, watch times, all of that, is probably going to influence YouTube quite a bit. Might influence some of what Google's doing, but Google pulling in YouTube videos seems to be pretty heavily influenced, not only by like what the video is itself, but also by where the video is used. So I've tended to find that if videos are more embedded on other websites or incorporated on other websites, that kind of helps Google get a sense that, oh, okay, this video maybe matters, this video is maybe important. So there could be some potential value there. Is that conclusive?
Yeah.
No. Nobody, from Google is going to tell us that specifically, but I think that's something that I'd start experimenting with is, try and build up the community on YouTube, try and build up, those external sites that probably will help the video show up more. If nothing else, right? I mean, building up the community has plenty of secondary benefits, well beyond, whether it shows up or not, right? You get more engagement, you get more followers, you get more traction. Certainly showing up on other websites, that's going to help, a lot too. You get more plays, you get more, exposure to who you are, what you do. So looking for those opportunities, it might help, search, whether on YouTube or Google, but it could also kind of generally help the business. And so that's where, as you think about strategies, for this, yeah, it's about getting traffic, but it's also about, what are those other ways that you can build your audience, build, that exposure around things, and trying to find things that potentially have,
One of the
both benefits, both for SEO and then
the
the
branches of
exposure side.
SEO that kind of fascinates me a bit is keyword research. This is the reason being that with keyword research, you kind of like you're already seeing the questions that your audience are asking, and so you get to like create content around that. So for me, let's say YouTube, for example, what would be a foolproof system to like finding keywords? Um, such that we get to understand even the deepest questions that people are asking. So not necessarily about um, um, how popular the keyword is, because what I'm saying is that certain times let's say you're having you're selling a high ticket offer of something like $10,000, $20,000, right? If you probably get maybe 20 people to watch that video, and let's say one person clicks on the link to go buy your stuff, like that video might not be so popular, but it will be like like in terms of business, that would be like a very wise business decision compared to maybe you're having a ton of views but nothing. You're probably selling a product that's like $3. It doesn't really make sense. You understand? So what's like the system that we could use to do keyword research? Though I don't know, paid and free tools if you can. I don't know.
Yeah. So the, the kind of interesting thing around keyword research is that this is really shifting pretty dramatically. Where, for one, Google for a lot of years now, but certainly increasingly now is obscuring a lot of the keywords. So we just don't know, what people are searching in a way maybe we used to. And obviously that's been growing. It was, like a decade ago or so that Google started doing not provided, actually removing keywords out of Google Analytics. They've just, kind of been doing more and more of that. And even Google Search Console, which is really only our real insight into what people are searching, it's heavily sampled. They, pull a lot of that data out. So it's very incomplete what we get with keywords. So that's, one problem. AI search, we have no idea, what those keywords are. Google, definitely isn't bringing in anything from Gemini. It's unclear what they're bringing in from AI overview responses. ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot, Claude, none of them are showing us, anything about what the prompts people are entering in. So we're kind of in a spot where we're working against a black box where we just don't know what these things are. We don't know exactly how these things work or what exactly people are typing in. So some of the tools that are out there, the Ahrefs, SEMrush, those kinds of tools, still good. They still are a way to find those keywords, but the one source that you kind of have to start going to is you have to do user research. You have to actually talk to people who are visiting your website. Even if you talk to, 5 people, 10 people, just, hop on a quick 10-minute, Zoom call with them and just, go through and say, okay, what kinds of things are you typing into ChatGPT? What kind of things are you typing into to Google these days? Related to these subjects, you're going to get a wealth of insight from that. To me, that's one of the most reliable sources. Honestly, that's where personally for my blog, that's where I source pretty much all my keywords as I talk to my clients. What are you looking at? I listen. What are the phrases they use? That's what I'm writing toward. And I think there's a lot of potential value there because that's stuff that isn't necessarily going to show up in Search Console. There are also some tools out there, like Brandlight, Noatoa as another one. They're helping to surface some of the prompts. What they're doing is kind of looking at like a sample of all the prompts that could potentially be asked and what the responses are to those. Now, it's not necessarily what people are searching or what they are typing in, but it gives you maybe some ideas to work toward. There's a few others out there as well. I think Otterly is another one potentially that you can use
Yeah,
to
thank you
generate
so
those
much
things
for
and
sharing that. I
find
mean, the
those.
landscape is changeable. I like the fact that you talked about user research. Like that's like the best thing is to just talk to your client, talk to your customer, and if you can hop on a call with the people who you're creating content for, just interview them, talk to them, ask them open-ended questions to get to know what their pain and their struggle is, and that way you get to make content that actual humans really, really want.
Hmm. And it's also data that won't be obscured and can't be obscured, right, by any tool because it's a direct connection with somebody. Um, and what that also does, right, to the idea that try and take on tactics that have maybe multiple benefits. The actual conversation with somebody, what are you searching? What are you thinking? What are you looking at? That will have 2 benefits. One, it gives you a lot of information about stuff, but also as a way to connect with the people talking, they're actually reading your site, actually talking to them. Because I've found, when you write a blog, you kind of, you're just, it's you and your screen, right? And you're just typing away and you kind of lose sight of there's actual real people on the other side of this, who are reading this. And so it's a great way to, be able to actually just, talk to somebody about that and
Oh,
get some
yeah,
feedback
thank you so
and,
much
maybe,
for
kind of
sharing that.
help build the audience
Uh,
as well.
most creators think that content is king, right? But you said that technical SEO is the silent traffic killer. What's the most overlooked technical issue hurting small creators?
Yeah, there's a few different issues I'd point to. I think one issue from a technical standpoint is you need to understand, how your website's actually built. A lot of platforms, they build really cool, really, slick websites, with all these really cool features on them. And you see like really great templates, whether it's a WordPress template or, some other content management system that you're using. But those templates, they load everything with JavaScript. And so JavaScript is a different kind of programming language. It loads everything in the browser. And so sometimes, when Google visits the page, they're able to execute JavaScript. There's a lot of JavaScript that they're not able to execute. So you run into things where, like, if you have, effects on your page, where as you scroll down the page, content starts to fade in or starts to appear, or maybe you have some kind of infinite scroll. As you scroll down the page, more and more stuff just automatically loads in. Look really cool, can be a great user experience, but Google is unable, to crawl those things, and even best case scenario, they're unable to really reliably crawl those things. So you need to start very fundamentally with making sure that you understand, what's on your template, for your website. Make sure that it actually can load your content in a way that Google will be able to crawl that. And there's some simple tests you can do and simple things you can run to start checking for those things and look for those things to make sure. Like one, that I like to use, it's just very simple, just to get a very rough sense of how this works. It's an extension in Chrome called Toggle JavaScript, and it truly just lets you turn JavaScript on, turn JavaScript off. And if you turn it off, that's way too extreme. Like Google's not crawling without JavaScript entirely, but it gives you kind of the worst case scenario. What do you find? And I see a lot of blogs who, unfortunately, they've decided, hey, I'm going to use this WordPress theme. It looks great. I really like the user experience. It's just so cool. There's some really great features in here that I really prefer, but it's just not coded in a way that Google's going to be able to crawl it reliably. And if Google can't crawl, you can have the best content in the world, right? You can do all the things we were talking about with, customizing it, making it unique, making it human, all those things. It doesn't matter if Google can't load it. So that I would say is certainly one of the biggest ones that can just absolutely demolish traffic that you need to be really aware of and pay attention to. And this is something too that honestly, it affects every website. I work with clients who run the spectrum from super small, to big Fortune 500 companies. I've seen this problem happen on all of them. Where it's just, it comes up. So it's very much a universal problem, but
you
it's one
studied
that,
log files.
Can be that, silent killer.
What's shocking, what sets of patterns do you see when Google crawls a typical creator site?
Yeah, one of the patterns that I think never ceases to fascinate me is that Google seems to get obsessed with certain parts of the website. So when you look at log files and you see, okay, what's actually getting crawled, what's actually showing up, here, how often is Google crawling things? How often are they coming back to things? One of the patterns that I just routinely see is that there's usually a group of pages that Google comes back to a lot and is actually kind of drawn to. So that might be top blog posts, on your site. These are just your top ones. Could also be category pages or author pages that they're coming back to. Those are usually on the positive side, right? Those are positive trends that you want to see. Oh, great. They're coming back to, my top 5 blog posts. Great. Or they're coming back to a really important category or, the really important author pages or something. Fantastic. That's where you want Google to be. Those are the positive patterns. Sometimes see this with negative patterns too, where they're obsessed over a certain blog post, but it's not one of your top blog posts. And they just keep crawling it. They seem to be really focused on that, or they're focused on maybe a less important category on your website. And so what that starts to trigger is, okay, well, why? Is Google obsessed with those particular things? What is it that has made Google think that's the case? And this is where you need to start looking at, well, okay, what is influencing Google with that? And usually what's influencing Google is link patterns on the site. And so it's understanding, okay, well, what are the link patterns? And, if you see, hey, they're crawling this really old category or something, you go back through and you start, looking at link patterns on the site and you realize, well, actually this, obscure category that we don't really like, maybe it's actually getting linked to, more. May not just be on your site. There can be some other reasons why they get obsessed with things, but it's usually one of the things I start to look at. So that's what's really cool about log files, is that you can start to get that sense of what are these patterns that are being established, and where there might be problems in there. You can start to get a sense of, okay, how can we kind of change up our website a little bit to influence those patterns and change how Google's behavior.
Your website and see, okay, these are the issues, these are the things that needs to be fixed. How can someone who creator with zero coding skills fix crawl errors without needing to hire a developer? Now, I would assume that let's say the creator is using WordPress for their blog.
Yeah, so if you're using WordPress, there are some no-code options that you have. So, like one of the most popular SEO plugins is going to be Yoast SEO. Within Yoast SEO, you can have a lot of control over what Google is able to crawl, what they're able to index. So within Yoast, at the post level, you can go to advanced settings. You can turn certain posts that you say, I just don't want this showing up in search results, or this page is just riddled with errors. I want to pull this out, or maybe it's got low quality content. I want to pull this out. You can toggle that to no index. Within Yoast SEO's overall settings, within search appearance settings, you can also toggle off like really low quality content, or toggle off, certain areas. For example, like tag pages are usually one that creates a lot of low quality, thin content. Get a lot of errors on that in Search Console, right? Maybe you see those tag pages coming up a lot as crawled not indexed pages. Or discovered not indexed pages in Search Console. Well, by toggling off those in the sitemap, that helps prevent Google from being able to find those pages, look at those pages in there. The other thing that you can fix within WordPress relatively easily is the ability to go into individual posts and fix links. So if you look at something and go, well, wait a minute, I'm not linking to my most popular post very much. You can go through, you can add those links in, or if you find that, wait, I have a lot of broken links, like a lot of 404s are showing up in Search Console. Great. You can go through and you can fix those. Particularly if you supplement maybe Google Search Console with something like Screaming Frog to find those errors, to surface those errors. Right? Screaming Frog will crawl through your site. It will tell you where there might be errors. And then you can go through and you can edit those pages in there. So for at least some of the types of errors, like broken links or, pages that don't get linked to enough or low quality pages, there are some ways that you can, fix those
You
without
wrote
necessarily
a
having
speed metrics
to
guide. What's
get deep into
the
the code.
easiest way someone can do to boost their core web vitals for a WordPress site?
Yeah, there's some good plugins, with WordPress that you can use. WP Rocket is one that I guess recommended a lot. I've had a lot of success with it. Um, individual hosting companies, often have their own, plugins now that they will let you install that help with that. So start there. Start with those kind of caching plugins. That is a way that those caching plugins will do a few different things to improve speed. So they'll help like compress the pages, make the pages smaller, so that way they don't consume as much time when they're getting loaded. But the other thing that these will do is they'll actually go through and maybe in some cases rewrite images or optimize the images for you. There's another good plugin that's really helpful with images in particular called Short Pixel. And Short Pixel will go through and it will actually convert your images into a different format. It will deliver it from a different service, from a CDN. So that way it's actually able to load more quickly on there. So working with those kinds of plugins can be a great way to just make the website a little bit more efficient. Some of the decisions with WordPress too, you start with the theme that you're selecting. So I was talking about like JavaScript errors that happen with the theme, but there's lots of speed errors that can happen with the theme too, because if you pick a theme that has a lot of features or is really robust, that's great, but it's also going to probably be a slower theme. So both by looking at plugins, by making better selections with the theme in the first place and keeping speed considerations in mind with theme selection, that's a way that you can kind of start to reduce speed without necessarily having to get too deep into the code of like reworking things or trying to optimize
for sharing
how
that. I like the fact
code
that
or the
when you
database works.
optimize the images as much as possible, if you can reduce the size of a particular page, it gets to what that means is that the loading time would be faster compared to if a page of like 20 KB will load faster than a page of let's say 5 mega 5 MB anytime, any day. So yeah, as much as possible, we can reduce the size. Then the other factors like hosting companies, all those little factors. But as much as possible, if you're using like let's say standard hosting companies, standard sites, and if you just do that, you should be you should improve a lot of things. Thank you so much for that. Now, for me, earlier on we touched on this a bit, and Google came up with a framework called the EEAT, the Experience, Expertise, Authority, Trust, right? And this has been around for quite a while now. As someone who is a solo creator, and most of my audience are solo creators, right? How can we prove this to Google? Right, go like establish ourselves beyond doubt that we have the experience, we have the expertise, we have the authority, and we're trustworthy without being a big brand.
Yeah. It can be a little hard, for those of us who are, smaller, to establish that, and be able to kind of stand out. But there are some ways to do it. So one big thing to start thinking about is consistency of information on your website. So if you talk about who you are, what you do, why you do it, your background on your website, make sure that information's one, up to date, make sure it's consistent. But it's not just your website. You want to think about what's out there, everywhere else as well. So do you have profiles? That could be social media profiles, local profiles, maybe industry specific profiles, that you've claimed them, number one, and number two, that they are, not necessarily active, not that you're, constantly doing something with them, but they have the correct information. That starts to help, right? Because that starts to make you look like, okay, I have, all my stuff together, and I know, what, I'm talking about. I've, kind of presented this consistently. I see a lot of cases where you start looking at things and you go, oh, that profile's kind of older. That's a little out of dated. That's talking about stuff that I was doing a few years ago, but hasn't really been updated. It's stuff I'm doing now. Um, Stuff I'm guilty of. I don't always remember to keep all my profiles updated because it's hard. But I think just having that intentional mindset of, yep, every quarter I'm going to go through and I'm going to check all of these, make sure these are correct. That's part of it, is being consistent. With that, part of it too, with being consistent, isn't just about what you're talking about with yourself. It's being consistent in what your, message is, what your topic is that you're talking about, making sure that your content doesn't get out of date, making sure that if you cite your sources, in your blog post, I got this information from over here, you're going back and you're checking those sources, you're updating things, you have that update cadence on there. And updating things regularly, helps, not just to, like refresh the page, but to really refresh your sources of information. That helps establish that, okay, I'm trustworthy. Another big part of expertise, is getting other people to say that you're an expert. If you can, doesn't have to be much, like doesn't have to be, some major publication, but if there's, other authoritative sites in your industry that are coming up, can they talk about you, or can you do collaborations with them? That starts, establishing some of that, for you, correctly. So those are the kinds of things I would start, looking at, the kinds of
Well,
things you want
just
to
quickly
start
and briefly,
exploring
should
to
creators
build that up.
still target keywords, or is AI shifting SEO to topics? What's your take on that?
It is more topic focused now than in the past. And AI search in particular is pretty much all topic focused. So the more you can think about what are the broad topics I'm discussing on my website, what are the broad, kinds of things I'm actually covering, I think that will tend to serve you better on your website, and also serve you better in AI search as well. Um, so yeah, keywords are still important and you want to think about that, but it's also, how do we actually, look at the topics on our site? So some of the stuff I'm doing with clients is trying to build topic models on their website, understand, okay, what topics exist, how, prevalent are certain topics relative to others, making sure that that topic model aligns with what you'd actually want out there, what you'd actually want, to be representing you. That kind of stuff seems like it has a pretty decent impact over, how you're going to show up in both search, with Google, regular organic listings, as well as in new AI search. So more and more, I would start to think about topics. And as you start researching, what pages am I going to create? What posts am I going to create? Think about it from a topic first standpoint. And that starts to shift the mindset a little bit, because you might, say, well, I need, 5 different pages to go after 5 different keywords, because I can really dig into the nuances of each keyword or something like that. But with topic, shift focus, well, if you, are thinking about topics, maybe you don't need as many pages, but you can really cover that topic really completely in a single page. So all that to say, yeah, I would definitely go after topics, both from a, researching what you're going to talk about, and then also
what
changing
method do you
maybe
usually use
how
to
you talk
find
about some of
topics?
those things.
Let's say I'm just getting starting in a niche and I have absolutely no idea in that niche. what would be the non-traditional approach to like find topics?
One of the best places I've found to start to find topics is looking at Reddit as a place to start. Go through and start searching Google for Reddit responses, or search Reddit directly. Um, won't necessarily get specific keywords in there you necessarily want to use, though sometimes you can. But you'll get a sense of, okay, how are people talking about this subject? What kinds of things are they struggling with? What kinds of things weren't answered very well? Reddit, or in some cases, more industry specific forums can be really good. Like travel space, TripAdvisor might be better to go after. So finding whatever that is, for that particular industry. That to me has proven to be a pretty good way to find topics, is to find those community
Oh,
groups,
I
the
like that.
forums
I think there's a
within a
tool
given
that kind of
industry.
like
Go after
automates
that.
the process for you, and that's I think Gummy Search also, where they kind of pull everything. I don't know if you're aware of the tool, and they show you the pain, the negative, all the things that people are talking about that topic. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, there are a few tools that do that. One that comes to mind too that like does a good aggregation of that is like that Answer the Public site. It'll come back with a bunch of questions, giving you lists of things. Those kinds of tools are useful. Honestly, too, I mean, the other thing that I think is a good tool, for this is, okay, you go through Reddit, you just scrape a bunch of things, right? Just copy paste a bunch of things, maybe some of those other tools as well, copy paste a bunch of things, and then give that to ChatGPT, give that to, whatever your favorite AI tool is, ask them to start summarizing things about that, because that starts leveraging those AI tools in a way that they're actually designed for, right? They're a pattern-based system. They've been trained on these patterns that exist out there. Well, now if you're giving it something and saying, hey, extract the patterns from this, that's what those tools are designed to do, right? They're designed to go through and extract those patterns. So yeah, start there, start on those forums, build out that list, but then you can actually use, these AI tools to, start pulling all that together for you. And I can find that
Yeah, find pattern and
helps. Again,
everything.
not,
Yeah.
asking it to
Yeah.
write the things necessarily,
Well,
but just
quickly,
pull
what's
things
like the most
together,
underrated
extract
free
the
SEO
patterns
tool?
out. Right. There's a lot of good SEO tools that I would say are probably underrated. One that you'd asked about, like speed earlier. The one that I'd point out for speed as a way to kind of understand what's really happening on my website. Do I have problems? Is web page test. So web page test, they have a premium level, but they also have a free level. And what's really cool about it is that it gives you the ability to be able to look at your website speed from different locations. So you can say, okay, here's, what my traffic looks like in the United States. Here's what my traffic looks like in Europe, or, somewhere else where my readers might be. And you can also test it on different devices. Here's the speed on desktop. Here's the speed on mobile. And so as a way to start understanding, do I have a problem with speed? Do I have a problem with core vitals? Run several of the pages on your website through web page test for these different conditions, for these different, locations, device types, connection speeds. Gives you a really good sense of, how quickly your website, loads, and how your website loads. Because one of the things that I really like about web page tests is it actually shows you a visual. It shows you a film strip of, okay, here's how my, page loads in, what comes in first, what comes in, last. And you can really watch that how it loads. So gives you a pretty good sense of, where you might have speed problems, but also gives you a pretty good sense of, okay, how are people experiencing my page? What are they actually seeing when they load the page? And that can give you a pretty good wealth of ideas of where you might have problems, where you might have opportunities, what you could potentially, change on your website. So I tend to, find a lot of value in that one, and I don't see too many people
Yeah.
maybe talking
Thanks so
about
much
that,
for sharing
or
that
discussing that
with us.
as a helpful
What
tool
would you
these
say
days.
now? There are a lot of content formats out there, right? There's video, there's text, there is quizzes, so many different types of content formats. What would you say is one that a lot of people are kind of like sleeping on? They are not even aware. They are underrating so much that you it kind of annoys you.
Yeah, well, it is a version of, kind of all of those, right? I think that the thing that I would say people are maybe sleeping on a little bit, or not thinking about enough, is how do you create sort of multimodal modal content. How do you actually utilize all of these mediums together? And how do you actually bring all of them, right? If you're creating a piece of content, well, how do I make this really helpful? How do I make this, really unique and really stand out? And demonstrate a lot of effort behind it. It's utilizing, not one type of content, but as many types of content as you can. So I have a great article and I have a PDF that you can download and I have, a quiz that's related to it. And I also have, a video, for different parts of this article as well. And maybe I have, an audio recording I did where I'm reading parts of this or some of this, and so on. So you're kind of blending all of those sources together. To me, I think that's, probably the one that I don't see many people doing.
Yeah.
Honestly, probably one I don't do enough of either myself, because it's hard, right? We're talking about something that's really involved, but that's why it's really valuable, is that it is hard. And the sites that are doing that, they get pretty good results out of that, and it gives them lots of different ways, to reach their audience, which is really what you want to be able to do. When you're creating content. So I guess my recommendation would be,
Thank you
think
so much
about,
for
going after as
sharing
many different
coming on the
mediums
podcast.
as possible.
Quickly, that's what's like a 2025 SEO trend, or kind of like a new trend now that creators should prep for or double down on?
One trend I would point to, I mean, it is the one we've been talking about with AI search, but specifically, I would say the trend within that is understanding, how content needs are changing within that. Because now our content needs to serve more purposes than it did in the past. Our content absolutely still needs to speak to people. It absolutely still needs to bring in, our audience and convince them to come to our website in order to, capture that, traffic somehow and be able to convert that traffic somehow. But at the same time, our content is now becoming, training material for, AI engines in a way that we've never had to think about it being training material before. So that to me is a pretty interesting trend of, having to kind of rethink how we approach content. It's not just, hey, I want to optimize this thing, I want to get traffic, and I want to convert that traffic. But it's also, how do I make this, content something that AI systems can actually learn from, and how do I write content in that way? How do I speak to these different intentions in a different way? So I'm starting to see a lot of people go after that. I'm starting to see a lot of discussion happen around that. And to me, that's one of the probably most interesting trends of this year, is that, we are starting to see some of that real intentional
Thank you so much,
change
Matthew,
in
for
how
coming on
people
the
are
podcast and for
approaching
sharing with us
optimizing their content.
some of your favorite tools and techniques and tactics for SEO. Where can people learn more about what you do and check out your stuff?
Yeah, so you can learn more about me. My website is matthewedgar.net. I'm also active on LinkedIn, so you can search for me there, and happy to connect there as well, answer any questions that people might have. I also host a YouTube channel for my company, Elementive, so you can
So
search
much.
for
Thanks again, once
Elementive on
again, for coming on
YouTube,
the podcast.
and
A
find
pleasure
me
having
there
you.
as well.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom Journey, the podcast for content creators. If this episode sparked ideas, subscribe and leave a review. Share it with a fellow creator who might benefit. Check the show notes for links and resources. If you'd like to support the show, buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Follow us on social media to stay connected. Until next time, keep creating and seeking wisdom in your journey.